Hello, hello. I am so thrilled with this turnout. I'm so excited to see all of these bright, shiny faces. So let's get started because it is 7 p.m. and we like to get started on time. And Maria here has to be at work at what time?
I have to be awake by 1:30 a.m. tomorrow.
We'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But for now, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening during this must-see Monday presentation. My name is Vanessa Ruiz, and I am the director of the Borderlands Bureau at Cronkite News. And in addition to that, I'm the new director for Diversity Initiatives for the entire Cronkite School. So it is truly my absolute pleasure to present this incredible panel that we have been lucky enough to have for all of you tonight to talk about diversity in local journalism and what does that look like? And not just diversity, but certainly inclusion and equity as well. And we're going to talk about how do you tackle these kinds of issues as a journalist, as a communicator, as a representative and advocate, but also as members of newsrooms. Sometimes that can also be a little tricky as well, and as advocates, right? So again, thank you all for joining us. I'll step away now from the podium and I'll join the panel to begin the discussion. And then we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. So make sure that if something comes up or you have a thought or something that you want to ask, don't be shy. Because remember, right, most of you are here to learn to be journalists. And what do? We ask questions. Excellent. So let's get started. So before I have a seat, I want to go ahead and introduce the panel. And I'll start again with Maria. So she is Maria Hechanova. And she joined 3TV CBS 5 in July of 2017. But she is no stranger to Arizona. She grew up in the Valley and has lived in major cities, including Flagstaff for college and Yuma and Tucson for work. Prior to moving to Phoenix, she spent 4 years in Tucson reporting for KO. Is this microphone cutting in and out? Reporting for KOLD News 13, a KMSB Fox 11, covering wildfires, transportation issues, and Southern Arizona's largest school district. And before that, she worked for WLNS-TV, the CBS affiliate in Lansing, Michigan. So Maria is a broadcast reporter, and she is a part of the morning news team. That's why she has that insane work schedule. So thank you so much for joining us. Next to her, we have Representative Jennifer Longdon. She is an American politician and a Democratic member of the Arizona House of Representatives, representing District 24 since January 2019. Longdon was paralyzed in 2004 in a random drive-by shooting and has served on the Phoenix Mayor's Commission on Disability Issues, among other advisory boards, including the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Public Impact Panel. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Longdon. Next to her, Laura Gómez Rodríguez. Laura Gómez Rodríguez covers state politics and immigration for the Arizona Mirror. She has worked for the Republic and also La Voz Arizona for 4 years, covering city government, economic development, immigration, politics, and trade. In 2017, Laura traveled the length of the United States-Mexico border for the project known as The Wall, the Pulitzer Prize-winning project produced by the Arizona Republic and the USA Today Network. Let me see if this will work. Is that better? Okay, let's try that again. She was named Best Investigative Reporter by Phoenix Magazine in its 2018 newspaper category and has been honored by the Arizona Press Club for Spanish language news and feature reporting. She is a native of Bogota, Colombia, and has lived in Puerto Rico and Boston before moving to Phoenix in 2014. Welcome, Laura. And next to her, we have Jamar Younger. Jamar is the communications coordinator for the Arizona Charter Schools Association. Jamar oversees the organization's media relations and outreach efforts, social media campaigns, blog, and weekly advocacy newsletter. He has also worked for the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson from 2007 to 2014. At the Star, Jamar covered education, public safety, and county government, winning awards for his contributions to 2 of the Star's investigative projects. Jamar graduated from Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. So please, again, let's give our distinguished panel a big round of applause. Okay, so as we begin tonight's conversation, I think it's important to help set the tone and just kind of put it out there early on that sometimes having these conversations can be a little tough, right? And they can be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes for people. But one of the things that we always urge our students here at the Cronkite School to do is to step outside of their comfort zones, right? I mean, this is the perfect time, the perfect opportunity to do just that, to explore, to try new things, to talk to different kinds of people, and hopefully sort of start to get you in that mindset that the more people you talk to, the more voices that you have represented in your journalism, the better stories you'll be able to tell. So with that being said, I'm hoping that each and every one of you can sort of help us in your wisdom. And if you can speak individually about what diversity and inclusion mean for you as a journalist and as a communicator, is it something that you keep top of mind? I mean, I know that as a reporter, I didn't wake up every morning and say, I'm going to make sure that I nail diversity and inclusion today in my story. But nevertheless, it's important work, right? So I would love for each and every one of you to share your thoughts on this particular topic.
I can start. Is it something that I wake up thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna, make sure that all of my reporting is conscious of diverse voices and inclusive of our diverse communities? It's not really like that, but I would say it's something that for me as a journalist and, in my profession is diversity and inclusion is really important. I think that we can all do better than we do. But I think, I'm kind of like very critical, not only of my own stories and what we do as a publication, but also in general as an industry. And I think that's something that I always kind of think about. It's like, ooh, like, are we really covering issues of the Latino community fairly? Are we really covering issues of the Native communities in Arizona? Are we hearing from African American voices? That's something that's constantly I'm thinking about, and that is not always reflected in my publications work. But it's definitely always there. Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I think in my experience, I've always had to strike a balance between being the black voice in the newsroom, but still not being pigeonholed as the black reporter. So that meant that I would have to keep tabs on what's going on in the community and go to my editors and say, hey, this is an important issue, but still, work as somebody who was well-rounded or try to be well-rounded and, try to focus on all issues that affect everybody. But I think for me, it's just been within the newsroom, just focusing and, whenever there is an issue, just making sure that I speak up, making sure I'm saying, hey, we're overlooking this and we need to stop overlooking this. Or, hey, this is an important story and we need to cover it, whether it's me or not, whether it's on my beat or not. But still, just saying, hey, I'm also here to write about issues that affect everybody. And even in my current role, saying, hey, this is, when we, put this talking point out there or, promote this story or try to pitch this story, we need to make sure we point out there's certain things that I might see that my white colleagues might not see or my non-black colleagues might not see. So there's always a balance between being a voice for those issues but still being well-rounded.
So, Jennifer, do you have something to add to that?
I think the only thing I would say is, prior to being elected, I was writer and editor of a quarterly magazine that focused specifically on the disability community. And so in there, we were certain to get some aspects of diversity and inclusion right, but looking for the intersectionality to make sure that they weren't all people who used wheelchairs in our stories. They were not all of any other identity, not leaning too far in too many women or too many men or too many athletes or whatever else. And for me, diversity and inclusion is something that when it's happening, I don't notice. I notice it when it's absent. It's like oxygen in a room, right? You don't notice it's here until it's gone. And then you realize how important it is.
Sure.
So the question is, what does diversity inclusion mean to us?
How do you implement it? How do you keep it top of mind when you're out there covering stories and reporting on the community?
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say I'm American Asian, if anyone's wondering. We talk about diversity. I'm Filipina, but I feel like I'm more American than I carry my culture. So I guess real quick, a show of hands, how many of you have been in a newsroom before? Interned, been around it, the pitching. Don't be shy. Anyone? Okay, we got one.
They're starting out a lot.
Okay.
Of them. They're starting out.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I can tell you, it can be a really intense place, right? I mean, there's so many story ideas like thrown left and right and left and right. So to answer the question, what does diversity and inclusion mean to me? It's more than just about your race. I bring up my race because I'm brown. I mean, it's people come up to me in the field sometimes and try to speak Spanish to me, and I'm just like, no habla, like no habla español. So it's more than just about your skin color, in my opinion. It's your background. Where did you grow up? Your economic background. Did you grow up in a family that had a lot of money? Did you grow up in a multi-family household? To me, those are the types of different backgrounds that can come into a newsroom and really have different ideas or different ways to cover a story that I feel like sometimes there can be a lack of compassion or a lack of understanding for why someone did what they did.
Or why a community feels a certain way. I mean, absolutely. You talk about really important things. And Jennifer, you brought this up, diversity within diversity, right? Diversity of not just race and ethnicity, but of income, background, et cetera.
Your age, even.
Absolutely. How many of you have felt discriminated because you are young? Exactly. Exactly.
How about the term millennial? I feel like that term gets thrown around so much.
It does. It does. I want to circle back to something you said, Jamar, and that is that you have to try to strike a balance between standing up and speaking up and being that voice, right, in perhaps in your newsroom or as a communicator, to say, hold on a second, why are we not covering this story, or why are we covering it this way, right? And sort of feeling the weight of that responsibility, right? Of why am I the one who has to be the squeaky wheel? Why am I the one who has to raise my hand to bring these topics up and again and up and again? So I'm really interested in talking about that, because I have felt that way. I'll be honest. I have felt that way in newsrooms. And it can be a lot, right? And like you said, you don't necessarily want to be pigeonholed, but at the same time, you know you have a responsibility to raise your hand. So I'm curious to know if you'd like to share, and this is for all the panelists, if you've had a situation like that in the past, and how have you handled it?
There's been a few issues, well, not issues, there's been a few times, and luckily, I had some great editors and great colleagues when I was down in Tucson, where, I say, hey, there's this community event going on, and I wasn't on that beat at the time. I think I was covering the county. I think it was a community forum, but it was, in a historically black neighborhood down there. And it was, black oriented, and, we ended up covering it. And then there were some other things where, I was like, hey, this is a cool thing going on. There's a barber competition going on. And, I had them, they were able to cover that. I was able to write about a comedian that came to Tucson. So there were just like, there was certain issues where, I never really felt the weight of it, but I just felt like I'm just passionate about, not passionate, but I really cared about it, so I just wanted to make sure that I was just able to speak up. But there are certain times where I felt like if I wasn't there, then that story never would have gotten covered. And even like in my current role now, working with charter schools, I feel like there's certain things that might get overlooked that we can say, promote to the public, where that might not happen if I wasn't there, or people might overlook it. So I think that's the significance of, just being in that situation, having to speak up. But a lot of it just goes to overall lack of diversity that can be in the newsrooms, because at some points in Tucson, I was the only black reporter, and then in my current job, there's been times where I've been only black employee, period. So there's definitely a need for more of those voices.
You all taking notes on that? Okay. Maria, I saw you shaking your head emphatically.
Well, I just, the squeaky wheel. I mean, when you're in the newsroom, to be heard, you have to be the squeaky wheel, right? I mean, there's so much going on. There's so many different stories out there. That editorial meeting is so important, and the decisions that happen throughout the day. And as a journalist, as someone in the community, leading, writing, presenting, you have to just be comfortable to speak up. And whether you're comfortable or not, you gotta just get in there.
Finding your voice and your confidence, right, throughout the process, that's something really important, and that's something that a lot of the students who are here tonight will sort of start to discover for themselves as they move along. It doesn't happen immediately, but it does happen over time, right? Finding sort of that strength to say, hold on a second, let me just, let's take another look at this. And I do want to emphasize the part of it doesn't happen overnight. Even for veterans who have been in the business for 20, 30 years, it is still challenging, right? Sometimes to talk about these issues, but nevertheless, incredibly important, right?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what Jamar was saying, I think was important. It's not only just about being in the room, but also being in a place where you're empowered to be that squeaky wheel, I mean, sometimes you're the squeaky wheel, sometimes you actually can have conversations that are beyond kind of like combative, reactive conversations with your colleagues. I've had situations where I see something in a story that somebody else wrote in my own newsroom, and I said, hey, like, that's not really fair, that's insensitive. It's uncomfortable to go and challenge your colleagues. It's uncomfortable to go and tell an editor, hey, you overlooked this. You overlooked something that is your job to make sure it doesn't get in print, right? So those conversations are hard. I've kind of had situations where I'm like, okay, like, can somebody else bring it up? Like, why do I have to be the one that's thinking about it?
Eye contact. You gotta
right.
give someone else, one of your other colleagues, eye contact. Be like,
yeah, and then it's like, okay, well, if nobody's bringing it up, should I say something? And when you do and go and speak up, it takes away from what you're actually doing, which is like reporting and writing, right? Like, so it's an extra thing that you have to consider. And those conversations are hard. I have been lucky to be in newsrooms that have created spaces for journalists of color to talk to each other about these things and kind of support each other in these conversations, because, it's not, it's like it was mentioned, it's not just about racial or ethnic background, it's also people from the, LGBT community that also notice things that maybe I didn't think were unfair or insensitive. So that's something that has helped me, is to find kind of allies in the newsroom that you can vent to or talk to, or kind of like go in the corner and like give you a little pep talk, so you're like, okay, I'm gonna walk in there and like have this meaningful conversation that is uncomfortable. But sometimes if you choose to do it, then that is, I think that's what's really important, that you're in a space that allows you to speak up.
And I would dare say that while difficult and uncomfortable, if you do have that conversation, you can at least walk away knowing that you stayed true to yourself and that you were authentic in that process, right? And nobody can ever fault anybody for that, right?
So being the first or the only, it's exhausting, right? It really is. And for me, I still meet people who have never, ever, ever spoken to a person who uses a wheelchair, ever. Okay. And they don't even know how to begin a conversation. They're afraid to even figure that out. Seeing my community, seeing us portrayed incorrectly, there's a term that we'll probably get into called disability porn. That's the fastest way to get me to call your editor. Call you first, and then your editor. There is a style guide here at the Cronkite School has the National Center for Disability and Journalism housed here. So if any Cronkite student ever gets it wrong, I will take your head.
Wait, Jennifer, before we move on, why don't we explain to the audience what disability porn is?
Sure.
I think that's important.
So it's a term that we use. Disability porn is when you write a story that involves a person with a disability and you use some of these really tired tropes. Like, for example, taking your disabled friend to prom. Kids go to prom, right? How many prom stories do you tell otherwise, and how many make it like to lead your C block? How many times do you write a story that leads your C block? But let me tell you, you let the college football or the high school football kid ask the girl with Down syndrome out to the prom, and it's going to lead because, oh my gosh, isn't that amazing? When you see people with disabilities as only a source of inspiration to make everyone else feel better, when you don't go deeper into who we are and why we are, and that happens a lot in this community, as well as some really offensive, arcane, hurtful language that is commonly used. And that's really hard for us. And it's something that we've been fighting for a very long time. And still in newsrooms, you will still see that there is no person with a disability in those places, at least no one that is out and proud living with a disability. Because we're the largest minority population in the nation. 1 in 3 people live with a disability. But because of the stigma, people tend to hide it. So if I may, I'm sorry, I know that I'm filibustering here, but give me just 1 second. So I've had these conversations so many times with different newsrooms and different news organizations. I've been part of that here in Phoenix and nationally. And this is the best analogy that I've ever been able to use, is that when, none of you will remember this, but a long time ago, women reporters did garden club stories and the birth announcements and wedding announcements and these you didn't see them reporting on crime or politics, right? But as women moved into newsrooms and began to take their place and began to come into stories, they improved storytelling by bringing that certain perspective, by finding stories with women subjects that were important to tell, and also because when their male colleagues got it wrong, they were sitting there ready to go, oh, come on, I'm just gonna have to give you one of these, right? There was someone to go to say, so I was thinking about saying it this way, and she'd go, no, that's not what you're gonna do. So when you have diversity in your newsroom, you can go to, well, I do it on the floor of my state legislature. If I'm going to talk about an issue that's going to affect the Native American population, I go and talk to my Native American colleagues about it first to make sure that I'm sensitive in my language and sensitive in my framing. And I can do that, but without having those people to turn to fact check or to just kind of run through it with me, that's a problem. And that's part of why disability stories go so wrong, is there's no one to turn to in your newsroom to say, how would you say this about yourself? If I say this, are you comfortable?
So first of all, I don't think that was a filibuster, because I think you said a lot of really important points, starting with the description of what disability porn is. How many of you had heard that term before tonight? Okay, just a few hands. So, it's something as simple as those quick 30-second, 40-second videos, right, that we all see on Twitter and Facebook that involve maybe a member of the disability community, and you may not even realize what is happening, right, what you're watching. So I hope that after tonight, you'll walk away with a much deeper understanding of why this kind of journalism is not okay, right? That there's so much more to the person than their disability. So thank you for that description. I do find that it is incredibly important. And a lot of the students that are here tonight, they're starting out, right? They're here in school. they're getting their bearings, as they say, trying to find their voice, trying to find their place in this profession, in this career, in life. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for them in terms of finding that confidence that can be a little difficult at times to touch upon these kinds of subjects. I know that in the beginning, I felt intimidated. I know that at times I didn't want to raise my hand, but I'm curious to know if you have any words of advice for them.
I'm going to plug the Asian American Journalist Association.
Plug away.
So you're part of NABJ, the National, hopefully I get this right, National Association of Black Journalists.
Yes.
And you don't have to be Black, you don't have to be Asian, you don't have to be Native American. There's a Native American professional group to join. And I actually learned a lot just by going to one of the conferences. So you go to a conference, you meet a lot of different professionals, and they just help you feel comfortable. They welcome you with open arms, kind of walk you through the process, help you network, help you get your next job. That's actually how I got almost all of my jobs, was going to these conferences. And so I think confidence comes with exposure and gaining that work experience. The more professionals that you're around, the more you are exposed to different cultures and ideas. I think that's one way to build your confidence.
And I will say, I think those are great suggestions. So heads up, I know that we already had Student Org Night earlier this semester, but I encourage you very strongly, if you haven't decided to join a student club so far, take a serious look, because there's quite an array, and it's a wonderful way to build your network, to meet people outside of your circle of friends and start to build those connections that will help you down the road in your career. Now, let's talk about allies. Let's talk about allies, and let's talk about advocates, because we all know that we can't do this alone. We cannot do this alone. You know, you can't be, again, that person in the newsroom always raising your hand. And I will be honest and say that I think a critical part of making this work is having buy-in from people that are not necessarily part of a minority group. I think that is key. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how do you interpret that?
I really think it's all about the the pitch. It's
always?
It's always about the pitch. It's how you sell it. And so as a morning reporter, especially on the weekends, I get to do a lot of community events. And I try to cover whatever the Asian American community may be having, whether it's a festival or right now they're doing their district night market coming up later this month. And I think if you're able to tie it in to just mainstream, I guess, culture, and just say, listen, we're actually a lot more alike than you think, and that what's the universal language? I mean, food, right? Everyone eats food. How can you not want to go to a festival of different types of Asian food and try it? I mean, I think it's just about how you pitch it, how you connect it to, I guess, mainstream, how more people, because for us, it's like, how is this going to relate to the mass audience, right? You guys have mass communication here, right? How are you going to connect to everybody? And even though we're all so different, we're talking about diversity as human beings, I feel like we have a lot more in common than we think. So as far as allies, I mean, you find your producers that will listen to you, but I think if you're able to connect it to the bigger audience, that's an easier sell.
Yeah, I definitely think if you don't have people willing to believe in, people who are allies or people who are willing to believe in your vision, whether it's a story you want to pitch or a project, or just who believe in you as a professional, is definitely more of an uphill battle, because it can be challenging if you're working with people who don't share the same culture or the same background. It can even be like a regional thing. Like, I'm from the East Coast, and if you work around people who might not be from there, or they might be from another part of the country, and they might not be used to how you can come off sometimes, then they're like, oh, what is his deal? So it's important just to connect with people who believe in you. And I've have been fortunate, to work with people who believed in me, not just in terms of when I brought up an issue, but just believed in me as a professional. And ironically, that that had more to do with my work than it did with my race. But either way, you know, I was fortunate to work with people who saw past that and any cultural differences or we don't know about him or any type of implicit bias, just to say, hey, you know, he has potential, you know, let him work with me, you know, we'll you know, help him grow, you know. So it's just very important. But yeah, if you don't have those allies, it can be an uphill battle. But you know, that's the importance of having some of these organizations, student and professional organizations, and people who can help you, you know, and advise you in those situations.
Well, and what would newsrooms be like without these different voices speaking up, right?
Very
I-
boring
I
and inaccurate, more
and,
importantly.
You know, I just feel like we need more diverse people in newsrooms with different ideas and different backgrounds in order to just cover the story.
Yeah, I agree with what was said about the groups. I think it's really important to, you know, maybe when you find yourselves in newsrooms, you'll realize that if you are thinking of something or if you notice something or something is bothering you or you have an idea, you're probably not the only person who feels that way. If you're not lucky enough to be in a place where there are other people of color or of your, you know, of your background, definitely connect with the groups. But I think, Vanessa, you touched on an important thing. You know, the pitch that I make for diversity is that it's an ethical. That's to me the most important thing, and those are not my words of, you know, 28-year-old like Colombian immigrant. Like this is like the Association of Newspaper Editors, of News Editors. American Society of News Editors, I think, is the official acronym.
So many acronyms.
Yeah. But that's what they said. You cannot, you know, as journalists, it is our job to cover topics, communities, accurately and fairly. So if our coverage doesn't accurately and fairly reflect the people that are part of our community, then we're not doing our job right.
Not doing our job. I mean, thank you for saying that, because it is, as journalists, our ethical imperative to make sure that we are diligent and mindful of this kind of work in the reporting that we do. Jennifer.
So I think, too, when you go in and you have to pitch stories, or when you're assigned certain stories, I mean, there are things that are old and tired, and they're done every year over and over and over again, right? You have those stories, and you're just sick of telling it, right? So a great way to tell that story is always, right, you're looking for the new angle, and the new angle is diversity and inclusion. And if you can find a new voice to tell that story through, it's exciting and interesting for you. It moves a matter of public interest forward, and it meets some of those ethical obligations that we all have.
I think it's important that we talk about a few points that have been recently brought up, and that is the importance of seeking out mentors and people that you know will stand in your corner for the kind of work that you want to do. I think that's imperative. I think that's really important. I know that in my career, if it had not been for people who have supported me along the way, who maybe saw something in me that I didn't see myself in that moment, who knows, right? Sometimes you need people to believe in you at times when you don't believe in yourself. And so seeking out mentors, networking, going outside of your circle, use the resources that you have here at the Cronkite School. Talk to your professor. And speaking of talking, something that Jennifer, you brought up is, as reporters, and especially as young reporters, sometimes when we are facing the possibility of perhaps speaking to someone that makes us uncomfortable, that we don't know how to talk to, we instead retreat instead of actually just going up to that person and having a conversation with them. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because this sounds so simple, yet can be challenging at times.
Do you guys ever want to get angry at all when someone says something offensive? Yeah, right? And you're just like, I'm a professional, I gotta just hold it together. I mean, I think it's just about educating, right? Someone said that awful comment because they just didn't know. Maybe they were never taught. So to just like take a deep breath and then realize, hey, like I can make a difference here and help educate them that calling me Oriental is not the proper term. You know, they just didn't know.
Or inappropriate coronavirus jokes, for example, like we've been hearing and seeing lately. That's unfortunate.
And then there's some times where you have to kind of analyze the situation and you're like, this might make it a lot worse. Like this person, no matter what you say to them, it's not going to change their mind. And then maybe take a couple steps back. I don't know. How do you guys handle it?
You know, since I've been out here, I've noticed just a lot of ignorance. So, I mean, when people say stuff like that, it's coming from a place of ignorance. So sometimes you talk to people, like I'm always, if somebody really cross a boundary, I'll remain professional, but I'm going to let them know, like, look, that's whatever you said is out of, my slang term is out of pocket, you know, it's wrong. Like, you need to watch what you say, you know, like, I'm not going to play any games with them. You know, but, you know, the people who, sometimes people just believe what they believe and you try to talk to them and it's like, you know, they're going to try to argue with you. But, you know, it's still important to have conversations because, you know, some people, if they're willing to listen, then you can make a change. But, you know, yeah, I just try to remain calm and professional. And sometimes it's from a place of racism. Sometimes it's just from a place of ignorance, you know, because they haven't had the exposure to, you know, people who don't look like them or don't have the same background as them.
Are you talking about when you're out in the field reporting or like inside the organization?
Well, Maria brought up out in the field, but I think it applies to both scenarios.
I don't know if I just blocked it out of my memory, but I don't think I've been approached in a way that is when I'm out reporting that I felt was, you know, kind of targeting me for my.
What about on social media?
Oh, I just ignore them.
Totally
To be
different
honest,
ballgame, right?
I do not engage, but
Don't engage. I don't engage.
Yeah, we had a situation last year. So I'm also president of the State Association of Black Journalists, but our previous president was in the process of organizing like a Meet the Board event that we had right here. And, you know, we pushing on Twitter. Somebody comes out of nowhere on Twitter, like, why is there a Black Journalists Association? Like, why couldn't it just be a Journalists Association? And, you know, I felt like our president at the time handled it really well. He's like, you should come out and visit and talk to us and find out. You know, so there's definitely no tactful ways to handle that, you know. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm angry. You know, I mean, I wouldn't have done that on Twitter, but in my mind, I'm like, dummy, like, you know. But, you know, there's definitely, you know, tactful ways to, you know, handle situations, especially on Twitter, you know, because, you know, they can be there forever. You know,
You mean that happy, shiny place we call Twitter, where only good things happen? Right. But no, in all seriousness, really important points because one, I mean, you know the drill, you know, right? You don't engage with people who clearly have an agenda, who are trolls, who no matter what you say, you're not going to change their mind. But it is important to talk about social media, particularly with our young journalists, because it is important to remember that not only perhaps one day we'll be representing yourself as a journalist, but also a brand or a company, right? And people do look at social media when they're hiring, when they're doing job checks. So always really important to keep in mind, right? I always say in those kinds of situations, there are ways that it can be handled both professionally and in a classy, elegant way, right?
But this is kind of before, you know, obviously before I knew I was a journalist, but my mom always raised me by saying, you know, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to be published in the front page of the newspaper. Now, you know, I'm a journalist, which is kind of like, okay. But basically that's kind of like how I was raised in this standard. If you're not gonna own up to what you said and how you treated someone and how you reacted to a person, then just don't.
Someone will screenshot it. If you delete it, they'll screenshot it before you delete it. They'll post it everywhere. It's, I mean, it is like crazy how we find people. Do you guys know how we find people to talk to? on a daily basis. We just show up
We
at their
stalk.
house. Yeah, like we're professional stalkers.
Well, that's what I tell my students.
And-
You're not here to be a journalist. You're learning how to be a professional stalker.
So just keep in mind before you post anything or send that direct message, just know that someone can screenshot it, someone can find it, and that when you get those emails like, so-and-so just got hired, what do? Of course we want to know who they are, what their work is, what do they do, how do they present themselves. Social media is the new business card, right? You don't need a handout business card. I lose pieces of paper all the time. That is your digital footprint. That is your professional/personal, because it sometimes blends together. I mean, people want to know that you're a real person. You're not just this, I just write for a living. So just keep that in mind. I know it's hard. When you're 19, 20, you're just like,
And I mean, obviously, we all know that people on social media can get incredibly mean and disrespectful and rude, but
yes.
don't engage. I think that's always the best course and the best action that you can take. So let's talk a little bit about the success stories, because I think it's also important to highlight the incredible storytelling that can come out of making sure that your storytelling is diverse and it's inclusive. So I'm curious to know, are there any particular stories that you've done that you feel particularly proud of?
Yes, I will share kind of my experience, and I think it relates a lot to what we've been talking about. So I was working, my first job when I moved here to Phoenix was for Levels, which is a Spanish language publication, part of the Arizona Republic, which is part of Gannett, which is one of the largest companies, newspaper companies. So I think I asked to go to like a journalism conference that I don't remember if it was like IRE or it was one of the journalism conferences for like training and investigative reporting. And I asked for permission to go because I was asking if my organization was going to pay for me to go, or if at least I could, count them as work days when I was attending the conference. And yeah, I was like allowed to go, and they paid for part of it. So I went and, had what we've been talking about, like a really nice, connection with network of other journalists of color who kind of experience the same frustrations and maybe success stories and pitching stories that are important to different communities. So that was really nice. So I came back to Phoenix, and I was super grateful that I had been allowed, to take some time off to go to this conference. So I asked the editor at the time, who was Nicole Carroll, just for coffee, because I wanted to say thank you. And she was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. We met up for like half an hour. And, I said, oh yeah, like this was such a great experience. Thank you so much. And then, we talked a little bit about my job and what I was doing. And she asked like, what is it that like I want to do? And I was like, I think I'm really ready for like a big like project that's like part of like the national projects that our company has. And I had told her that I had learned that I had been considered for one but my editor at the time was like, no, she's not ready. And I was like, no, I was ready. Like, I want to do this. I think that was like, I don't know, maybe like a year later when the Gannett was doing this project for the wall where it was like, putting up a bunch of resources. She remembered that conversation, and she was like, why don't we include Laura, whose beat is not to cover border and immigration, but she has covered immigration issues and has the sources and the connections. Let's see if she wants to participate in this national project. And she did, and like I did, I of course said yes to driving, 2,000 miles in a rental car. It was so fun for me. But anyway, yeah, so, and then, that's the project that ended up winning a Pulitzer. So I think that was obviously like a situation where I kind of got out of my comfort zone to say thank you to, the top editor at the newspaper, and that conversation led to something, an opportunity. But it was also, somebody who was in a management position who kept people in mind. So it's like a combination, right? Like you have to, speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself, but also be lucky or blessed to be in a place where people, your leaders will keep you in mind.
And if I can just say something really quick about that, because sometimes the truth is that maybe you hit some roadblocks and maybe you're not really being heard. And I just want to say that it's important to also at a certain moment make a decision and say, is this the best place for me? Is this the place, is this the best newsroom where I can do the best work that I can do? So just also keep that in mind, right? Sometimes I think we tend to feel like we are tied to our places of work, and that is absolutely not true, right? Thank you for sharing that, Laura. And, again, The Wall did win a Pulitzer Prize, and you were a part of that project. So kudos to you for speaking out. Yes, absolutely.
Can I just jump in on I think sometimes some of the stories that aren't told can be important, and what I mean by that is to have cultural sensitivity when it comes to certain stories. For example, I cover crime here and there, and we were trying to get this family to talk, and we would knock on their door, we'd call them, we'd message them on Facebook, whatever we can. High profile story. This family's Native American, and the way that it was described to me is when you die, that there's some sort of passage or ceremony that happens, and they aren't able to talk about their loved ones. And so even though I don't really understand the culture, but I understand just kind of respecting it, I guess, to help try to communicate that to the newsroom and say, hey, you know what, I think we need to back off. Whether they listen or not, I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's that conscious that you have inside. Did I do everything to help at least bring this issue or this side of the story or this culture and let them have a voice, at least within the decision-making process? And so they chose not to have a voice. And so to help communicate, I think we need to back off and let them have their ceremony or whatever it takes for them during this really, really difficult time.
Good for you. Good for you for saying that and for bringing that up in your newsroom. I know that can be very hard, especially as everybody's chasing the same story, right?
Yeah, we're chasing, we're running.
Oh, yeah.
Wear different shoes for that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. So I see the microphone has been set up. And so now I'd like to take the opportunity to open up the session to your questions. As I said at the beginning, I really hope that something that we've said tonight has sparked a thought or a question within you, and feel free to ask away. And I see someone very cautiously walking to the microphone. Hi.
Hello.
What is your name?
Rosara.
Hi, Rosara. And you're a student here at the Cronkite School?
Yes, first year grad student.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to say thank you to all of you guys for being here. It means a lot to me just because in academia, you don't really see diversity. So to have all of you guys sitting here, I really appreciate it. But my question is, when you're in the newsroom, how do you not feel like a one-trick pony by being the person who's always pitching the diverse stories? I often feel like that in the classroom. I'm always pitching like a story with Border Patrol, or I'm pitching an African-American story, and I often feel like I'm the only one doing it. So how do you balance that in the newsroom?
I think for me, I was always willing and always pushing to get out of my comfort zone. Like, covered education 2 separate times. I covered cops, I covered county government. After covering cops for 4 years, I went back to my editors like, hey, I really enjoyed education. So I really pushed for them to put me on that beat. And at the time, they had one education reporter, but they ended up, we needed another education reporter, so they created a beat so I can cover some of the other issues, that, the other reporter couldn't cover because she was so busy. So it was just a willingness to get out of my comfort zone. And then after doing that for about a year and a half or so, they were like, hey, we need you to jump on county government. And at first I was like, man, I really enjoy education. But I was like, you know what? This is good. This is like, they wouldn't just put anybody on this beat. So it was just for me getting out of my comfort zone. And also I really enjoyed the idea of just being a person of color on those beats and jumping out of my comfort zone and, being a black person, but still, writing about, just different issues affecting everybody, whether it was tax levies or, potholes or, just budget shortages, things of that nature. It just, I was just always willing to push for those opportunities, that might have taken me out away from the comfort zone. So if there are any opportunities out there where it might not just be culturally related, but it's like, hey, this seems cool, or I don't know much about this, but I want to get to it, I really encourage you to pursue those opportunities.
I think everybody has their thing, right? So, I mean, you may feel like you're only pitching this one thing, but I mean, everyone has their beats or their thing that they love to cover. I mean, even just having a conversation with your colleagues or coworkers, I mean, we have a very inclusive team at Arizona's Family. And so we bounce ideas off each other all the time. And I may talk to another coworker like, hey, I can't do this story today because I have already something set up. Like, think you want to do this too? So I wouldn't take it as just, I'm the only one pitching this certain thing. I think especially in our newsroom at least, like everyone has their thing that they like to pitch.
I don't know if I have an answer for you because it's something that I still kind of deal with, and but what I would say is like I think like I said earlier, like you should be empowered to speak up whenever you feel like you want to, and it's okay not to do it every time. I know we sometimes have like a sense of responsibility. I'm like, okay, like I'm the only voice here. Nobody else is gonna bring it up. I have to say it. Also, just give yourself space to be like, today I'm just gonna like focus on doing my story. I'm not gonna have that conversation because it is hard and it's emotionally taxing. And if you're doing it over and over again and it's not getting addressed, then it's like frustrating and and all these emotions, right? But I do think it's important, I think of diversity and inclusion in like 3 kind of major areas: hiring, like getting people, through the door; retention, and I think what you bring up is a really important point in what newsrooms should be doing to retain people from diverse backgrounds. Is if you're not supporting the people or empowering them to, to speak up and to help shape the coverage in a way that is more sensitive and more fair and inclusive to the communities, then, you feel all the things that I've felt before, And then the third thing is management. So it's important to get people from diverse backgrounds in management so then they can be the ones that be like, you know what, today we are gonna have one person that only covers, the differently able community in Arizona. Or we're gonna have, or say, hey, like every story, like tell every reporter, every story that you pitch me, like give me your source list and make sure that it's diverse and it's equitable with gender and, all the different topics that we talked about in diversity. So I think it's really unfair that it feels like it's a battle, like an individual's battle against a newsroom. I don't think that's right. And I think, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we should be challenging the people who are in power and in management positions to change those things, because they're the ones who can also be doing a lot of things for those changes.
Go.
Real quick on that, any story I do, no matter what it is, and I do still do some writing, it is a story about disability. If I write a restaurant review, it includes accessibility. If I talk about a concert or a book, somewhere in there, that sensibility still comes through. And folks that see me, if my storytelling is in person, then disability becomes part of that story, even if I never speak of it. So my diversity shows no matter what. And, in the little writer bio at the end of my story, disability is right there. So I can tell a story about anything and not use any language around disability. And it's still a disability story because I told it.
Thank you for that. Laura, and I just think it's important to to really remind the audience that the importance of leadership, and I hope that I can plant this seed in your brains tonight to see yourselves maybe down the road, not only as reporters and communicators, as producers, but also see yourselves in those management positions, to not be afraid to think about leadership and what that looks like for you, and the fact that each and every single one of you can occupy a role in that space so that we can continue to help each other, support each other, advocate for those who need the support. So again, I want to plant that seed. That's something that I tell my students all the time. Don't be afraid to aspire to leadership positions down the road, because you can make a tremendous impact. And that goes for you too as well.
Thank you, guys.
And you also don't need like a management title to be a leader in
Absolutely.
your space. Like you don't need to be, I mean, ideally, but that's something that I learned when I was going into, professional spaces, is that, there are the leaders that you see in the masthead or like with the editor or management title, but then there's also many leaders within the space that don't have those titles that you can be and you can also go to.
And sometimes those quiet leaders behind the scenes are the ones who really shake things up. So just a heads up on that. So any other questions? Oof, this hurts my heart. Okay, I see a hand.
Uh-oh. Wow.
Would you please, sir, would you mind stepping up to the microphone?
It's actually wrote it down. It's not. It's less of a question and more of a observation with the diversity. I'm sorry, with the disability porn, as you call it. Yeah, it's. One thing I learned. I'm a journalist, and I also work with Maria. We work at AZ Family. I do a segment called "Caught Misbehaving." But when I was in the Bay Area, I did a segment called People Behaving Badly. And I reported on people with disabled parking issues. And I used to call them handicap parking. And then someone wrote me and said, well, we don't use that word anymore. Now we use the word disabled. So I began writing disabled everything and finding the right ways to say things and doing a story. But when I moved to Arizona, every single parking space I hear says handicap. No one got the memo about the change in Arizona. And that always shocked me, and I was going to talk to you directly, but I decided to talk to the group since everybody else is here.
So I drink a lot of bourbon, and there's a reason. So we did recently, by state law, change so that every place in state statute that the word handicapped has appeared will be replaced with the word disability.
Excellent.
And there are still some folks who prefer to call themselves handicapped as opposed to being disabled. And, there are other terms, other identifiers that have been used that aren't used any longer. Language evolves, right? And words have power, and so we need to learn to use them well. So the thing that I would say, I appreciate that you're sensitive to it, and that's fantastic. Again, Cronkite is the home of some of the best disability resources in the nation. So the National Center for Disability and Journalism is housed here with a style guide. And if any of you have had the pleasure of taking a class from Amy Silverman, she is the most recent editor of that. I edited it back a couple ago. And there are debates about how we use language. Is it people first or is it identity first? Am I a disabled person or a person with a disability? Are you an autistic person or a person with autism? Different identities choose to use words differently. And then the other thing I would tell you is there is an international journalism contest also housed here. The Catherine Schneider Excellence in Disability Reporting Award is done through here. I've judged it for this last year is the first time I didn't. And if you want to see good examples of what good journalism looks like when it includes disability, it's all right there. And then Livability Magazine.
And I just want to quickly plug that style guide is also available in English and in Spanish.
Yes, it is.
So my other comment was about, again, back to diversity in the newsroom. And I've worked in the business for 30 years, and I've been in some newsrooms where I am the only minority the whole time there. And what used to bug me, and I had this discussion in the Bay Area, and I haven't had as much here, is that when we report the news, how we report it, like as it relates to race, and how you can, how do I put it? You can subtly say the race of a person by the conversation that you put out on the news. We always seem to want to talk about if it's a black person in a black neighborhood, how we would describe that neighborhood so you knew it was black. So we would get away from saying it was a black person, but then we would do stuff like, yeah, well, it happened in a certain neighborhood that everybody in their mind knew what it was. So we kind of, I try to tell people how to not use race when you're trying to describe a story. But people just don't get it, so I just wanted to.
Can I give you a real quick illustration, again, around disability? So when the FAA flight patterns changed, it was a story, everyone was telling it. They moved the planes so that they would fly over historic neighborhoods. One of them was mine. It was a big deal. Everyone was reporting on it. We were fighting it. We were fighting it here in Phoenix. We were fighting it at national level. And I was quoted in some stories because I'm a homeowner and because I happen to know a lot of journalists. And so one journalist said, and Jennifer Longdon, who lives here, reports this and talks about this. But then another one had to first start by prefacing entirely about me and my wheelchair and my service animal. It's not germane to your story, so why does it belong? And I think that's what you're saying here, too.
Yes, exactly.
If race is not germane to the story, or disability or gender is not germane to the story, then why are you putting it in? And that's important. So thank you for letting me, thank you for letting me tell another story.
No, thank you for that. But that is a conversation that, quite frankly, I have heard different interpretations and variations of depending on the newsroom, right? Some newsrooms say, no, you will describe the suspect as the police describe the suspect. And if that includes race, it includes race. And in other newsrooms, the ethos is, we're not going to say what race the suspect is, because why does it apply? But again, I just think it shows that there's still a lot of gray area in this discussion. And certainly that is always almost the case when we're talking about ethics, right? And I think as we've talked about earlier tonight, a big space when we talk about diversity and inclusion is the ethical imperative of these kinds of conversations. So believe it or not, it's 8:02, and you guys are still hanging out with us. That means that at least we've entertained you for an hour.
Were we that compelling?
So, because I know my Cronkite peeps, again, like to stick to the schedule, I'd like to turn it over to the panelists. 1 or 2 sentences that you really feel, a thought, something that you'd like our students and our guests tonight to walk away with after this conversation. Boom.
Yeah, I'll say something. I think, sometimes it can feel like we are the first ones talking about this, or this is diversity and inclusion is a new thing. It isn't. Inequality in journalism has been brought up. I mean, at least since like 1968, there was the Kerner Commission report that said journalists from mostly white spaces have failed in the coverage of the race issues in this country. And news organizations took up the challenge of reaching racial parity in newsrooms by 2000, and that didn't happen. So, I mean, I think something that is important to understand is that there's historical context when we talk about diversity and inclusion in the news business, and this isn't something new, and there's been, failures that have happened. And so I think, that context is important, because sometimes we can feel like we're the only ones thinking about this and we're the only ones troubled by this. And that's not true. And again, find peers, like-minded peers that you feel supported and empowered by.
No. Okay. 2 things. 1, diversity isn't just the color of your skin. It's your age, it's your background, your economic background, where you grew up, what region you grew up in. So diversity is more than just the color of your skin. And 2, don't be afraid to ask. Say, you're not sure how to address somebody of a different culture, or you don't know why they do what they do. I think they can appreciate it more if you come from a place of, I don't know, can you help me understand, versus just assume or just judge right off the bat. So diversity is not just the color of your skin, and don't be afraid to ask, even though it may feel uncomfortable to understand or how to address someone of a different culture.
Excuse me. I'll echo Lauder's point in saying that you are not alone. You may, even if you feel alone in your newsroom, there are people out there, resources out there who are willing to help you. Like you said, the student organizations, and then when you get into the professional world, the professional organizations, or just anyone that you can meet that, might be able to show you some support. And I also say, just respectfully stand for your beliefs. Just be willing to talk to your boss, talk to your editor, go behind closed doors and say, I'm feeling this way. Like, for example, a couple of years ago or a few years ago, I had a conversation with a boss, and I told him outright, I feel marginalized. I feel like everything that I can offer, not really considering or respecting it. And, things changed after that, but just be willing to respectfully talk to your bosses and just stand up for what you believe in.
So words and images have power. You know that, you believe it, that's why you're here. And so you have a moral and ethical imperative to use them well and use them wisely. And be intellectually curious. Think about how much time you spend writing a lead or framing a shot. So take that same care and curiosity when you encounter someone that you don't quite understand or makes you nervous, to get that understanding rather than just make your assumption.
Before we wrap it up, I just also want to add one last thing, if I may, and that is that every single person sitting here tonight, your voice matters. No matter where you come from, no matter what your background is, your voice matters. Every single person in this room, because you bring your own perspective, your own way of seeing things, and that has value. So I hope that you take that with you, that you process that you support each other, that you try to understand each other a little bit better as newsroom members, as journalists, and heck, as human beings, right? And go and tell those amazing stories that hopefully will reflect our communities accurately and fairly. So Maria, Jennifer, Laura, Jamar, it's been an honor to have this conversation with the four of you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for speaking with our audience, our guests, our students. Their handles are up there, so if you have a follow-up, if you have a question, don't be afraid to tweet them, to maybe hit them up on Facebook. Reach out. Again, the resources are there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you again to our panel. Big round of applause. Thank you.